Back to business today, and our focus this second half of the show is about the Finance Bill 2024. Quite a myriad of recommendations in a quest to raise revenue. And I think it's an important thing to just look at some of these recommendations, what it means. In studio, I'm joined by James Kimani, Associate Director Tax at KPMG. Thank you very much for making time, James. For starters, government has a right to raise revenue. This has come from one of our top government officials. So that is a non-negotiable. And even when government was promising, under the bottom-up auspices in the campaign period for hustlers, it wasn't like, oh, we won't tax you, we'll still tax you. But the question is how you tax. Now, I'm told that there are principles that do guide taxation. One of them is fairness, equitability, and whatnot. When you look at the Finance Bill 2024, and you juxtapose, as they call it, to the principles of taxation, is there a sync between two?
And thank you so much for having me again, Peter. And what I would say is that definitely the measure that we are seeing the government taking takes away the principles of taxation from the equity, the fairness. And what the government is really trying to do is to achieve that element, because we have seen over time, number of people being taxed, but also a large number of people really being not taxed. And there are those sectors that we really call hard to tax. And this is what the government is really trying to achieve by saying, if we are about, say, 19 million people who actually have PINs, out of that, perhaps about 13 million people or 13 million taxpayers essentially have some sort of incomes. But how many of about that 13 million are actually paying tax? You find perhaps is only about 4 million people that are paying tax. And even the 4 that are not paying the right tax. Yeah, they are paying some element of tax, but if they were to be audited, if they were to be reviewed, you realize they're actually not paying the right tax. So that is exactly where the problem is. The government needs to, collect tax, because the government have only 3 ways of getting money to operate. One has to be through the taxes, second one has to be the appropriation in aid, and the third one is through debts. You are aware that we are already getting to the maximum that we can really borrow. And remember, even if we were to borrow, this borrowing that we have done, this debt that we have, we must really get money to pay for that debt. So we are then left with the first 2, that is the ordinary revenue, which is from the taxes, and obviously now from the appropriation in aid. Appropriation in aid is essentially what government would collect, say the ministries, what you would pay when you go to, renewing your passport and all those. And you'd remember last year when the government tried to increase the charges for those, and there was a noise all over. And therefore, the money that the government gets from appropriation in aid is very, very minimal, and it has not increased over time. So we are then left with the first one, which is the revenue, collected through the taxes. So essentially, based on what the government is saying, we fully understand that the government would then need, obviously, to live through the taxes. But then, is the taxes that are being erased, are the measure that the government is taking sustainable? That's really the question. And as we have said, is it really following the canon, the principles of taxation, which is from equity, fairness, and of course, among others,
So, foundationally, is our bigger problem honesty, first of all, in terms of, or integrity, if we might put it so, based on the fact that, first of all, a very small percentage of the population is the only one that is taxed.
That's really a tax,
So, and you're saying even those who are taxed, it's not honest.
They may not necessarily pay,
Yes, generally, it's not to the maximum capacity or the requisite capacity as one. So, but also from the people being taxed perspective, they're also looking at, okay, how are we utilizing these taxes? So, foundationally, is it an integrity issue that we're facing as a country?
Yeah, To be honest, yes, I agree with you, and it's on both sides. Both the taxpayers, some of them who have an opportunity not to pay the right tax, may end up doing that. And on the other side, the same taxpayer is saying, I'm happy to pay the tax, but I also need to see what my taxes, where my taxes are going. I have probably paid tax over the years, but I'm still using roads that have potholes that are essentially supposed to be repaired by the government. People go to the hospital, they find that they still cannot get medication. But they are saying, I've paid taxes. Why can't I get the medication, especially in public hospitals? So we have seen all these issues about vaccines. And the question was, why is the government not able to order some of these things in good time so that people do not suffer? So there is a bit of some insincerity in both sides, both from the taxpayer and the government, because I believe that so long as people are able to see what the taxes they have paid and how the tax is being utilized, I'm sure most of them would be able to and would be willing to pay the taxes.
All right.
Yeah.
So the approach of the Finance Bill 2024, as you've said, the government is really trying to go into the cracks to find those loopholes that they think there is money being made here, and also devise new ways of raising taxes. Of course, the most popular one that there was noise around, and there's still noise around, and which some people have argued is sort of a smokescreen.
Yeah.
It is the issue of bread and the issue of motor vehicle tax.
Yeah.
And motor vehicle tax, for example, almost fits to what you alluded.
Yeah.
That sometimes I see you drive, you have a PIN, but you pay nothing as they would argue. But the approach seems to be very wrong. Essentially, you're taxing somebody for owning a car, and you've classified that under income tax. I mean, go into the mind of Treasury coming up with some of this suggestion.
Yeah, and you put it light. First, the way the National Treasury is trying to raise revenue, it is perhaps for them focusing on how much can we get. But in the process, then they miss a point. Because one, introducing motor vehicle tax through the Income Tax Act is obviously wrong. Because the guiding principle under that act is actually Section 3, which really says it has to be an income. All the other guiding principles within that act have to be derived on the Section 3, which is the income. You must have the income first. Then we can go to the details of how you need to pay tax on that income. So having a motor vehicle in itself does not necessarily mean that that is an income. So that is, of course, the first stage that can obviously people can go to court and obviously get away with that. But however, even if it was to be moved, say, to Miscellaneous and Levies Act, the question becomes, while we are trying to say we tend to tax people because they have income and we think they are not paying tax, taxing people 2.5% of the value of their motor vehicle, while we know that the insurance penetration in Kenya is extremely low. Most of the people and most of the vehicles that you see being driven around are actually on third party. And third party, you pay around 7,500. So when you tell somebody to pay 2.5% of the value of their motor vehicle, although there is a cap of 5,000 to again 100,000, which is again an issue, because as we have said, one of the canon or principle taxation is equity.
Yes.
And therefore, capping it in itself brings an issue of inequality, because it means somebody with a 20 million vehicle pays 100,000, while somebody with a 4 million vehicle end up now paying that 100,000. There's an element of inequity in itself. But again, you ask yourself, if I have a car, in the village that is normally used for agricultural activity and all that, and I have probably paid it, a third party, because probably it doesn't find itself even on the tarmac. It's just in the rural area. Then you want me to pay 2.5 of the value of that car. And perhaps the person have been paying the third party simply because they cannot afford, comprehensive. So in itself, it becomes very, very difficult to collect that revenue, because it means even the few people that have tried to get into the insurance, that number will still reduce. Okay. And the number is still very low. So there is a bit of an element that this motor vehicle tax was not well thought out. Perhaps the National Treasury thought of increasing the revenue, without looking at all measures. And as a result, that is not crafted well. We have, of course, had a discussion with the Committee for Parliament, for Committee for Finance and National Planning, and we have raised our concerns on this. And we have, requested that this particular proposal is not well thought out and need to be deleted.
All right, James. Looking, the government actually is projecting to raise ordinary revenues, 2.9 trillion worth of ordinary revenues.
Yeah.
And the aspect of how this is going about, because it seems it's an aggressive pursuit for revenue raising.
Yeah.
If history is something to go by, I don't know whether the government is trying to overshoot so that they at least aim for the moon and land in the stars, or aim for the stars and land in the moon, something like that.
Yeah.
That is one. And two, even the economic principles that normally guide taxation vis-a-vis productivity, that the less you tax, there's a high probability that you will collect more.
Yeah.
This seems to be principles that have been sort of given a blind eye.
Yeah, and the biggest issue is, as I said, the three sources of revenue for the government is the tax, the appropriation aid, and obviously from debt.
Yes.
We are trying to move away from debt. So the only way then we can fund our budget, which is now 3.949 trillion, is essentially through the revenue. But when you look at what they want then to get from the ordinary revenue, as you have stated, 2.9 trillion, you look at from the history in the last 5 years, the Revenue Authority have never met their budget. On average, they have done about 93%. So this year, their budget is about, the year ending now, this month, their budget is about 2.4 trillion. And looking at how they had performed by the end of Q3, it's unlikely that they will even hit that 2.4. So moving that number up again, to about 2.7, then you add the revenue, the appropriation aid to get to the 2.9, then you may realize that they may not obviously achieve that number. So it's perhaps then boils to what you have said, that they want to aim at the sun and probably force at the moon. But I think, in my view, if you try to increase the tax rates and you put so many taxes, people then try to look for more ways of trying to evade that tax. And of course, you make the tax so complicated, because one principle of taxation is the simplicity. The tax needs to be simple so that it becomes very simple to correct and also for the taxpayer to comply.
All right.
And therefore, what is likely to happen is that they may need, in my view, to push what we are having as the E-teams. Because what E-team will help them achieve is to try and bring many people to the tax bracket. Because if we assume, Peter, what we have said, that about 4 million people are the ones that are paying taxes.
Yes.
If we were to increase that number, and the 4 million, assuming, are the ones that are contributing to the 2.4 trillion that the Revenue Authority is expected to achieve this month, end of this month, if we were to increase that number to about, say, 7 million Kenyans, it means that we will be able to contribute lesser amount, but achieving that targeted amount that we want to achieve. So the concentration, in my view, should be to increase the tax base, improve the tax base, and then with that, then you reduce the tax rate. And perhaps this ties to, Peter, this ties to what the government have been thinking from the medium tax revenue strategy. When you look at the medium tax revenue strategy for 2023-2024 to 2026-2027, that is really the thinking. That can we be able to even reduce, say, personal income tax rates? Can we be able to reduce the corporate tax rate from 30% all the way to 25%? Can we be able probably even to reduce the VAT? Can the government reduce the VAT from 16% to about 14%? Because the lower the rates, and studies have been done all over the world and have shown that the lower the rates, the simpler it is, then you are likely to achieve more.
Definitely.
And perhaps to the question that you asked about bread. Bread has always been there. Every finance bill, I think for the last 7 or so years, it is always put in a finance bill. And my thinking is that this is always meant to sort of distract people from the main thing. So you
Yes.
find it is always moved from zero-rated with an intention to take it to vertable as 16%. And that is the first thing that people pick. And they make noise around it, and then the government remove it. So I should always caution people that let us not lose the focus.
Okay.
We are focusing on the wrong things.
Definitely.
That one will be deleted. Yeah.
That's true. Thank you very much, James,
Yeah,
for
thank
your
you.
input. I think this was a good discussion, and the key takeaway is let us not lose the focus.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's very strategic, even communication-wise. You put a few things that people will make a lot of noise, but underlying there are heavy issues that are passing under. Sort of a Trojan horse situation that you're having with this finance bill that we need to solve. But thank you very much, James Kimani, Associate Director Tax at KPMG on Matters Finance Bill 2024. And now talking of powers as we close up, all customers on Kenya Power's prepaid